ladies and gentlemen, please close any gaps in the seats in our aisles. There are still people waiting in, and we'd like as many people in to see the panel as possible. Thank you very much.
I see you've been tweeting.
Okay. Yeah, I've never used Periscope before. This is my experiment with it. Because clearly, this is the best time to play around with new ads.
Yeah.
With this big of an audience.
Okay. Okay.
Test. Ladies and gentlemen, if you could please scoot inward so people can fill in on the outside of the aisles.
We're going to get started in about a minute or two, so if you're still finding a spot, do so quickly. If you've got an empty chair next to you, why don't you raise your hand so someone can find it? Thank you. You guys are so good at raising hands. Looks like there's still a couple hands up if you're looking for a spot to sit.
Your name has lost meaning for me. Badges for Sanderson.
So we need to find a bigger room next time.
All right, so you guys all know who he is, but I need to explain why I'm sitting next to him for the majority of you who have never seen me before. I'm Jennifer Liang, and many years ago I was the track director for the Wheel of Time track here. And I've moved on to other things. I chair my own Wheel of Time convention now, so if you are interested in that, go look that up somewhere. But the reason why Brandon was first at DragonCon 8 years ago was because I told him to be here.
I was really scared. See, I knew Wheel of Time fandom as a fan, and I knew how crazy they were. And so when basically the queen of Wheel of Time fandom wrote to me and said, "You're going to come to DragonCon and talk to us," I was super nervous. I can still remember it. I was talking to Jen about it. I walked in, and it was a room pretty big, not quite this big, but pretty big, packed with people. And I walked in and like, I've never been in a panel this size before, right? I'm used to going, it was only that same year, I think it was, that I went to WorldCon and did a reading, and there was only one person at my reading. And it was Eric James Stone, my good friend. They did schedule it opposite Lois Bujold's main address, which is part of the problem, doing the reading. But still, I went from one person at my reading to walking into a room like this, full of a whole bunch of people who were like, "You're not my real dad."
It was very weird hearing somebody that was not Robert Jordan talk about riding the Wheel of Time. Like, it was really flipping us out at the time. But he was good.
You were all very nice, except for they did this thing called Dark Friend games, right? Are You a Dark Friend? Which is basically like Assassin, one of those party games where you sit around and rant.
Yeah.
Except it's Wheel of Time thing. And they always murdered me, like first.
Yes.
Right? That's how I knew there was a little bit of subconscious aggression going on. We'd look up and they'd say, "Okay, who did the villagers want to kill?" Brandon. Every time. I was never the dark friend, but they killed me every time.
It was funny.
Yes. There's a group of 3 of them in particular that I remember who kind of ganged up and got me. And so I actually put them in, I think, as dreadlords in the books and got them murdered. I do
They're
remember that.
extremely proud of themselves.
They're very proud. They got in and murdered. So if you look for a conspicuous group of dreadlords who get killed in a very terrible way, that's them. Go back. You're in charge, Jen. You got to lead this, and then.
Okay, so I think the question that everybody wants to ask you all the time is, what are you working on right now?
What am I working on right now? Well,
this isn't a vote.
So yes, they're saying actually no. They watch the progress bars on the website, which I put there. Early in my career, before I was as Dan, my friend Dan Wells, he says, you used to be Brandon Sanderson, now you're Brandon Sanderson. So before I was Brandon Sanderson, I put those bars on the website because I was a Wheel of Time fan. And it helps so much to know how far along a book is if you're waiting for it. I know not all authors work that way. So don't go, harass other authors who don't do that. I have some friends that, the more they talk about the book to people, the harder it is for them to write. And so they get very closed mouth and quiet. And I am not that way. I'm a very open person. And so posting that up there gives me some kind of accountability in some ways. Like, all right, the fans get to know what's going on. So I'm working on the 3rd Stormlight book. It is currently 330,000 words long, which, for comparison, the original Way of Kings was around 300,000, and Words of Radiance was around 400. And it's only 3/4 of the way done. So I prepared the publisher. They're going to have to go through this again. Maybe I'll be able to get the future books in the series a little shorter, but this one's going to be a big one, which I know you guys are so sad about. I anticipate it being published about 1 year after I hit 100% on the first draft. So if you watch that progress bar, right when that kicks to 100, you're looking at about a 1 year period. I've been doing really well. Momentum's been really good lately. And so I'm expecting that to be October. But just watch as that goes, and it will slowly tick up. It's not ticking up right now because I'm actually doing revisions for part 3 of the book, which I'm doing the revisions as I write the book this time to get my editor, who's bipolar. I give him the parts when he's manic, so he revises them, and that lets us get through the periods when he's not manic. And he's manic right now, so I'm going to send him a part and be like, okay, Moshe, time to work on this. And so you just have to learn how to work the business this way when you've got an editor like Moshe. Book's going really well. This will have, most likely, Dalinar's flashback sequence in it, and I will be reading one of those at my reading tomorrow. Which I like to read from those because they take place before the first book, so it's not a huge spoiler for people who haven't finished, like Words of Radiance or anything like that yet, because it takes place before the series, but it's also, they're very kind of self-contained sequences. They read very well. My big worry is I don't know what room I'm in tomorrow. I should probably look. Yeah, that one I'm at. Oh wow. I'm in Vinnings. How big a room is that? Okay. So unless we get that changed, then you may have to get there really early. So we'll see if there's a larger room maybe available. They tend to put people in just the room where they do readings, when they have readings, not quite understanding that sometimes some readings are a little larger.
So I thought of something while you were talking about your progress bars. How much of the way you interact with your fans and your process with us is a reaction to being a Wheel of Time fan and the things that you wanted to happen from...
Right. I think a lot of it is, but it's a mix of being a Wheel of Time fan and just a fantasy fan in general, like wanting to know more about the business, being a budding author, and just wanting this transparency. And I don't think that the authors before can really be blamed. They didn't have the internet, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you couldn't really have a thing like I have now on my website, or that most authors have on websites. I mean, some authors tried newsletters, but those were huge productions requiring, actual paper, that stuff they used to use, that's sent through the actual mail, not the email. The email's named after it, kids. These were huge productions, and so it's not like I sat around saying, oh, those authors, but then you see my generation, when we broke in and where the internet was becoming the thing that it is, we're like, oh, let's use this. I remember when Kevin Sanderson said to me, so here's Twitter. And I'm like, Twitter? Why would, they're so short. It's like, no, but it's like you can create your own news feed from all the people you're following. And it's like a little kind of news ticker about what's going on in everyone's lives. I'm like, oh, that's a really useful thing as an author. And so I hopped on Twitter very early. I hopped on Reddit very early. I hopped on, some of the other defunct places. But the idea was that I'm going to go off a tangent. You'll get a lot of these. I have this view of a writer, and again, don't treat other, don't go say to other writers you should feel this way. But the way I feel is that I'm an artist and you are my patron. In the old days, you used to be an artist, you used to have like a wealthy patron, right? That's how you made art. If some rich person came and said, here's a bunch of money to live on, now go make this art, and then, mention that I'm your patron. And a lot of the great art we have, in fact, almost all of it came from somebody paying so the artist could actually have, food and a life while they were creating this art. And in the modern society, that's changed to the kind of the crowdsourcing. You are my patron. The crowd in general says, okay, we're all going to be insurance actuaries, so you don't have to be one. Thank you. You write these stories, and then we'll support you. And so my philosophy is, in a lot of ways, you are my boss, and more of a patronage sort of thing, but you're my patron, and so I should be accountable with what I'm doing. It doesn't mean that I'm going to necessarily change what I'm doing, and it doesn't mean that I'm always going to be writing on the thing you want me to, but I'll be clear about what I'm doing and when, just for that transparency, because we can do it now when we couldn't before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like the patronage thing is really interesting, the way that it's worked. I know you're past this now, like you don't need to do this, but would you ever consider something like the Patreon thing?
Oh, Patreon.
Is that something that you would have done 10 years ago? Could it exist?
Yeah, I might have. Patreon is kind of a harder thing, because I think Patreon is much better for people who are doing something that maybe not as market friendly, but which a group thinks is very important and should be rewarded. There are certain authors I know whose work is very important to the field, and like Nora Jameson.
That's what I was thinking,
and Nora's work is really important. It's really good, it's sold pretty well. But I think that the idea of trying to have to be market friendly is really terrifying to Nora. Maybe not terrifying. I don't think anything terrifies Nora. But this idea, she doesn't want to be beholden to that. And so her setting up a Patreon said, look, I'm just going to write this stuff. I don't then have to worry about the market. Is a really good use of Patreon. We set one up for writing excuses. And then we use the money to pay our guests and to fly people in and stuff like that. I don't need one because what I write naturally does very well in the market.
Yeah.
And so there's no need or worry for me to do that. If all writing shifted that direction, I'd be fine with it. But for right now, what's working here with me is working just fine.
Yeah, the traditional model of preparation, it really serves your...
Yeah, the traditional model works very well when you're someone like me, that my plots and my stories and things just connect very well with a large segment of the population. That's also why I don't do a lot on Kickstarter. Like, I think Kickstarters, like we let the people making the Mistborn board game, which, by the way, Mistborn board game, yay. You guys kickstarted that very well. I let them kickstart because they're like a small company, right, that makes the board game. And I said, you can make the board game, but you have to go get like a really good designer, because I can't micromanage your making a board game. And so they did. They got somebody very expensive, and then they Kickstarted, and you guys supported that. I think that's a good use for Kickstarter for someone like me. But Kickstarter and just something of my own, I'd rather that bandwidth at Kickstarter be used for people who maybe need it a bit more.
Yeah.
So I've stayed away from doing those things for now.
Okay. All right.
And we will do questions from the audience.
We
I told
will.
Jen she
That's
has
why I
to
keep
keep
checking
you
my
entertained.
watch because there's a certain amount of time I'm supposed
Yeah.
to talk, and then you guys get to talk to him. I could right now because I'm running low on questions.
All right, well, let's start taking questions
Yeah,
from the
let's
audience.
do
And let's, if it's easier so that people don't get ignored, I'm going to suggest we take them by block, and we take
Okay.
like 3 questions from each block.
Let's try this.
Okay.
We're going to have a microphone right here.
Oh, you're going to have people just walk up?
And people can line up
Okay.
here.
Yep.
I figured
Take them that way.
I should have realized you
It's
guys.
good.
Yeah. Okay. We
These
will
guys
let
know what they're doing.
DragonCon
We've
handle
done
it.
this before.
Yeah.
This is the way we did it for Barbara Jordan 10 years ago.
Okay. First question.
So when you were starting to write the books, did you have an idea for like the cosmos as all the matches are tied together first, or did you add that all
Oh,
together?
excellent question. So he's asking about the Cosmere, where all my epic fantasies are tied together. Where did that come from? I can trace a few paths back in my brain where that came from. What I can say is that it was built in from the beginning of the books you have been reading. But you remember, those weren't my first written books. I wrote 13 novels before I sold one. Elantris was number 6. Way of Kings was number 13. And so I love this idea of like a big connected universe. The first person I can remember doing it that blew my mind was when Asimov connected the robots in the Foundation books, which I thought was so cool when I was a teenager. Another path that I traced this causing this also, though, I don't know how many of you guys do this, but when I would read a book, I still do this actually, I would insert behind the scenes a kind of character that was my own, who was doing stuff behind the scenes. Like I would insert my own story into the story, just kind of take ownership of it in a strange sort of way. I remember doing this with the Pern books. I'm like, oh no, they think that person is who they think they are, but no, this is this other person. And so I had this kind of proto-Hoyd in my head jumping between other people's books. And so when I sat down to write Elantris, I said, well, I want to do something like this. All the people I'd seen do it before, and they've done it very well. Michael Moorcock did it, and Stephen King did it, and things like this. I'm not the first one to connect their books together, not by a long shot. I felt like a lot of them, they kind of fell into it. And as a writer, having seen what they did, I could then do it intentionally, if that makes sense. And so I started out with this idea that I was just going to have this character in between who is furthering his own goals. And built out a story for him, and then I went, after I did Elantris, I wrote a book called Dragonsteel, which isn't published, and it was his origin story for this character. And then I wrote some more books, and so on, of course, and things like this. Eventually, Elantris got published, and the other ones didn't, and they weren't as good as Elantris was. And so I took them all as kind of backstory canon, and moved forward as if they were all there and they had happened, but nobody else knew but me, which allowed this cool foundation for you're like, wow, all this stuff has happened because I had books and books of material that I could treat as canon in this way to let me know where things were going. So it wasn't planned. It was planned from the beginning, but not from the beginning of my writing career. From about book 6, it was where it started.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Hi.
So I have to say, first of all, I've loved everything that you've ever written. So
Thank you very much.
It's very rare that you find an author where
Wow.
it's like every book is amazing.
Everything I've ever written, you've actually read, like my essays for class. Oh, okay.
But still, let's take it back to the little time for a
Yes.
second. And your perspective on it was so wonderful, and you could definitely tell when you took over.
Yes.
It was like Raymond Sanderson is in this book. So one of my favorite things about The Memory of Life is that you had so much I guess, free reign with parts of it.
Yep. Let's try not to give specific spoilers. Talk general if you can.
So I just like, can you give me an example, or like maybe a couple examples of some things that you got prepared on? Like, and I could be totally wrong in this situation, but say like when the Greys, I think it was Yukiri, where she first created like the weave to be able to like see below the battlefield. Was that something you did, or was that like, oh, that's actually Robert Jordan's?
Yeah, good. It's an excellent question. I'll go through a few of these things for you. That one was me. One of the things that was awesome, but also a little bit difficult is the wrong term. Anyway, it was awesome to be able to come into the Wheel of Time as a fan and have read the books for 20 years and be thinking about, wow, I wish this would happen, and then to say, wow, I'm going to make that happen.
Right. So that's what I mean. It's like something, yeah.
Though as I was doing it, I also realized it was dangerous because there was a real danger for putting in like fan service type stuff. Not the traditional meaning of fan service, but like the fan service of it, Nard showed up in the last battle again, or things like this, like little fan jokes. I found that I had a lot of temptation to put those in, and so I had to like ride this really careful line where I was saying, what do I as a fan want to make the book more fulfilling, not just as a joke? One of the things that as a writer I'd always wanted to see was gateways used for more than they were used in the books leading up to that point. I feel like, teleportation, instant travel has a lot of ramifications. One of the things I kind of put on myself is I didn't want to create a lot of new weaves because I knew if I did, I really risked taking it too far away from Robert Jordan's vision. So I said, let's stick mostly to the weaves he's used and see if I can use them in more innovative ways. This whole kind of idea of taking the magic and digging deeper into it rather than going wider with it. And so a lot of the stuff with gateways is me. So for instance, I also went in and said to Harriet and company, I'm like, every book that Robert Jordan's done, almost all of them have added a new character who's become a main character who used to be a side character. If we don't do that for these last books, it's going to feel weird to people. So I would like to take one of the Ashaman and bring them to prominence and make them a viewpoint character and do what Robert Jordan's done. And so that's where Angel came from, is they're like, well, there's nothing in Robert Jordan's notes other than just this little bit about his profession. Take him and play with him and do whatever you want. And that was almost a little pressure valve for me to put the more Brandon-y sort of things, goofy magic system stuff with that. And that pressure valve allowed me to not really, knowing my own writing style, I was able to, the rest of it, be a little more Robert Jordan-esque, if that makes sense. You see that pressure valve there, and you see it with Perrin in the Wolf Dream, in the World of Dreams, because I've said before, Robert Jordan didn't leave very much on Perrin. Perrin is the big, empty, big blank slate for these books. We knew where he ended up at the end, and that was it. And so Perrin was the other sort of do whatever you want, Brandon, sort of thing. He left a lot more on the other characters. So if you're reading a Perrin scene, or if you're seeing them play with gateways, you're seeing me kind of let Brandon leak out a bit more. And this was done intentionally, like I said, part of the pressure valve, but also when I was given this, Harriet sat me down and said, you are the author now. I didn't hire a ghostwriter on purpose. I didn't want somebody who was just going to be Robert Jordan, because that would make a bad book, in her opinion. Robert Jordan can't finish this, so you need to, and yes, we want to stay true to his vision, but you are the writer now. And she was very clear on that, and I've always remembered that and how much that meant to me, being, she was the ultimate authority, but I had creative control to do whatever I felt the books needed, and then her job was to rein me back if she felt I went too far, and make sure the voice was consistent and things like that. So I got to do a lot in these books that I don't think a ghostwriter would have been able to do.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming to talk to us this DragonCon. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
I was wondering, when you started out, you at book 6, you didn't really have a much of a fan base. How has it been transitioning from lack of fan base to this?
Wow, yeah. So it's been crazy. Definitely been crazy. It's weird because as a writer, you become a writer to tell your stories, not to become famous, right? Becoming famous, like nobody becomes famous as a writer, right? That's what you figure, and you just want to tell your stories. If you would have gone to me when let's say, 99, 2000, when I was in the thick of writing all these books, and come to me and said, we are going to give you, just take a normal salary, like, something like 40 grand. 40 grand a year for the rest of your life, and you can write books. I would have taken it in a heartbeat. That guarantee, I'm there. I can publish a book a year. I will have enough readers that I can make a living on it. Like, that is all I ever wanted. In fact, I tell people, if I could just get there. Now with over 10 million books out there, it's different. But at the same time, being a writer is awesome in that, like, I sat next to somebody on the plane over here, and they're like, oh, what are you doing? I'm like, well, I'm a writer. And like, oh, should I know who you are? And my response was, no, actually, because I'm really, really famous with a very small and weird group of people. And that's got to be the best kind of famous. Like, I can't, like, if I go out, right, I'll sign maybe 1 or 2 autographs, and it feels cool, right? Like, 1 or 2 people will recognize me, and they'll be like, and then I'll sign the autograph, and it's great, but then I just go on with my life, right? And so, like, it means a ton to the people that it means something to, but to the average person, it's just like, do you want fries with that? Whatever, who cares? And so I basically live a normal life. Right? As normal as a life as someone can be when, you're traveling to Europe and things like that on tour. But when I'm at home, it's very normal. It's just me and my kids and my wife. I write at home. It's a blast. It's a normal life. I play Minecraft with my kids. I hang out and things like that. And then I go on tour and I'm a superstar for a short time with some really cool people. And then I go home and it's just normal again. And so... yeah, if you're going to be famous, be writer famous. Don't be, even the, movie stars very few people know. You recognize their face and they can't go anywhere. I don't think I would want that. So this has been awesome. And the other thing is, you always want to be able to just write whatever you love, and we talk about that. I mean, at the end of the Wheel of Time, we paid off my house. We put enough in savings for the kids and for whatever we would need to pay for the rest of our lives, and I retired. I retired like 4 years ago. Retired for me means I get to write extra books. So thank you guys for that.
Hello, Mr. Sanderson.
Hello.
Hey. Been a big fan of yours ever since Elantris.
Wow.
I must admit that I have not read your Wheel of Time books because I have not read the Wheel of Time yet.
It's all right. Someday you're going to have a really awesome 8 months.
I'm sure I will. I've heard very good things about it. One of the things that I really like about your writing is that, unlike a lot of fantasy writers, you know when to stop. There are a lot of writers who just keep going and going and going and don't seem to know when to stop. How much pre-planning do you do for your writing? And when do you know when to kind of put the brakes on things?
Right.
You're like, okay, I got to finish this up, because I don't want this to drag out like so many other authors have done in the past.
Yeah. So one advantage I had, and I found that I'm more rare in this. I thought I would be the normal, but I am a heavy outliner. And usually what you find with outliners as writers is that they write good endings, but they have trouble with character. Usually what we call discovery writers, who just kind of find their way through the book as they go, have these really kind of lively characters, and then their endings just kind of whatever. And there are great discovery writers who have great endings, and there are plenty of outline writers who have great characters. You just have to learn to shore up what's your weakness, learn your writing style. And for me, that is my early books, the ones that didn't get published, where the weakness was those characters. And I was really worried about it. And so I spent 5 years being like, how do I make the characters work? And I came up with this kind of like hybrid method where I took my friends that I knew wrote really great character, and I tried the methods they used. And so I kind of like discovery write characters and outline my plot, and then if the character's growing to someone that the plot wouldn't work for, I either take that character out and put a new one in and grow someone else in that place, or I rebuild the plot to match them. So I kind of have this floating outline that changes as I'm going. But I like good endings. And I feel like good endings are something that a lot of Hollywood skimps on that, and a lot of books just don't quite bring it together. And so it's something very important to me that I don't start my book till I know what that ending I'm pointed toward is. And that also says, then I'm done, right? When I have that ending and I pointed at it and I finished it, I can then be done. And I always feel that a piece of art that's continuous, like writing, you're getting serialized work. It needs to finish at some point to actually be a piece of art. And so that's why, Mistborn Trilogy, the end of the publisher hates that I ended the Mistborn Trilogy and said, okay, I'm done. He's like, yes, but you just hit, the bestseller list, top on the bestseller list. Like, yep, I'm done, though. That is a piece of art, right? It is finished. And it's not, one of the things I knew I was going to be doing this in my life, and I think the publishers are okay with it, because one of the things I did very early on in my career is I started convincing, hopefully I've convinced you all, readers that what they're following is kind of the Brandon Sanderson book brand rather than latching onto a series. And a lot of authors have this struggle where people kind of latch onto the series and not the author. And so then they feel tied to the series, and I never wanted to do that, because like you said, I think that there are plenty of series that have gone very long time, and the authors always loved it. But I also have read some series where it feels like the author feels chained to the series, and they only write one of these when they actually need a paycheck or something like that. And I never wanted to be there. And so very early I'm like, I'm not writing a sequel to a Elantris immediately. I may never. I probably will. But I told people, standalone book, it's just there. And if I write a sequel, it'll be about different characters, because that story is done. Mistborn Trilogy, yes, I'm going to come back to the world. But the story of these characters is done. And training people to all right, I like what Brandon does. I'll trust him that the next thing will be good too. And hopefully that works, but even if it doesn't, I'm still going to kind of do what I do. I would rather be the person who writes a lot of different things, even if it means I have a smaller audience, because I really like jumping projects. It keeps me fresh. People ask me, how am I so productive? It's really a mix of two things. And I'm going on tangent, like I said. But people ask this all the time, and I'm like, I don't know how to answer that. I just do my job, right? I write every day, just consistently. I don't write very quickly. I'm not a fast writer, but I write very consistently. I think I am lucky in that I didn't get published early. And so I had to have a job and all of this stuff and go through school, all while finding time to write 2,000 words a day. And I did that for 10 years before I got published. And so I had momentum. I knew I could just do these 2,000 words a day, and I would always have a book that I was working on that was getting ready, and I also learned to jump projects a lot to keep myself fresh. And so when I finish something, I immediately look for something very different to do, which will refresh me and kind of let me hit the ground running. A lot of writers have downtime between books, and that downtime is because there's I don't know if you guys get this funk after you finish a great book you've read, where you're like, oh man, it's almost like coming down from a high. Writers get that too when you finish a book and you're like, ugh. But if I can get excited about the next thing very quickly and start on that immediately, then I just kind of keep my momentum and keep going. So it's kind of a mixture of those two things, good habits and switching projects. So that means you shouldn't be frustrated when I do a book that's not your favorite series, whatever it is, because your favorite series would not be coming any faster, most likely. In fact, what you can look at is if you look at the time that Stormlight books have taken and compare it to the time that other big epic fantasy series taken, I do a Stormlight book at about the same rate, actually. I'm not that much faster than Pat or George or something like that. It's just that I know to fill that time between those big books with something else to keep my momentum going, or at least my psychology lets me do this. And I don't think the books would be any faster without that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi. One of my favorite things about your books is your characters. And I was wondering, you kind of touched on this in the last question, but what advice would you give to an aspiring author about developing characters?
Ooh, this is the hardest one for me to talk about, because for me, it was a matter of taking what I was doing wrong and learning to do it right, which, how do you do that? That's the story of becoming better at anything. For me, with characters, the big click that happened in my brain was when I realized every character is the hero of their own story. Every character sees the world through the eyes of, that's the only experience they've had, and they don't exist to fill a role. We don't exist to fill roles. We fill roles. We fill lots of them, but that's not why we exist, right? We aren't sidekick, or, we aren't spouse. We aren't, we fill those roles. And we identify in those roles, but we are not those roles. And when I started to treat my characters each like, I said, well, what is this person's passion in life? How do they see themselves? They're okay not being at the forefront of the story, but what in their minds do they see as their life meaning? Like, what do they want? Who are they? All of these things. And when I stopped sticking people into roles, which is really dangerous for an outline writer, sticking people in roles. When I stopped doing that, my characters really came alive a lot more. And so that's I don't know if that helps, but that's the biggest piece of advice I can give you is try to figure out a way where you can let those characters pretend like, well, if this person were the hero of the story, then not just the sidekick, what would they do? How would they approach it? What would they be doing if they weren't saving the world? Right? If this plot hadn't hit them like a freight train, what would they be doing in their life? They would care about things. What would they care about? What would they be doing? Hi.
On the planet of Malthus, Warbreaker's planet, is the method with which dead people are chosen as returned an autonomous system that is not governed by an intelligent entity?
No, good question. Yeah. I was hoping for one of those.
I'm surprised we made it that far before we got one of those.
Yeah. All right, go ahead.
Hi. I wanted to ask, so you, I think more than almost any other fantasy author, you create universes and then you leave them behind. I almost feel like you could sit down, you could have pages of like a physics lecture in each of your universes, and you would have like equations for everything, how everything works. Have you always had these ideas for these various universes with gods and magic systems and things like that, or are you always creating them sort of as you go?
It's yes and no. A lot of the ones that you're seeing in the Cosmere are things I created at the beginning to be kind of what the Cosmere was. But I left some holes intentionally because I knew I would come up with cool things that I wanted to add. And so I built in that wiggle room, and I'm always coming up with new ones. And there are way more that I want to do than I can write. Like, the one I keep wanting to find a chance for is, do you guys know how Nikola Tesla tried to, create wireless energy? I think I've talked about this one. He tried to create wireless energy, and I'm like, what if there were a world where that happened naturally? Right? Where you had a natural current going, and you could go set your lantern on the ground, and it would create a current sky to ground, and your light bulb would just turn on. You don't need electricity. And how would what if do we have giant toads that shoot out their tongues that create a current, and they're like taser tongues? Stuff like this. So I started jumping into looking at electricity and things like this and currents and whatnot, and that's just all back there. I'm like, oh, someday I need to be able to write this, but there are so many things that I want to write that I just don't have the time for. So it's a yes and no.
So do you have what if questions, and then you sort of build a universe from there?
Usually they're what if questions, but Sanderson's zeroth law. I've got these laws on magic. You can go look up. They're named humbly after myself. Sanderson's zeroth law is always err on the side of what's awesome. And usually it's less even a what if, and it's a that's so cool, taser toads, right? If you really want to know the truth of where the Stormlight Archive started, there's all this cool stuff where part of it was what if there's a storm, like the storm of Jupiter, and then I eventually changed it to a storm that goes around the planet, so, but it's something like that. But the real truth was magical power armor. Yeah! magical power armor is cool. Plate mail power armor. Why would you need plate mail power armor? You know, and like it starts with the really cool idea. Mistborn started by me hitting a fog bank at 80 miles an hour in my car and loving how it looked as it drove past and saying, is there a world where I can imitate this feel where you look out and it streams by? It's those early visuals or concepts that make me say, oh yeah, I want to do that. That is where my books really come from. And then I layer on top of them the what ifs and trying to build a realistic ecology based around these ideas.
Thank you so much.
Welcome. Stormlight feels very different to me on so many levels. You've got the interludes where we get to get a lot more world building. We get to see more of the planet instead of just one place. But there's also the sense that in a lot of your books, we're experiencing the aftermath of something. And in Stormlight, that something is coming. How is this affecting the way that you are building our world, your world for us?
So, this one's going to get you a story, okay? So, here's a story. I got to check to make sure. Yeah, I still got time. All right. Darkest time in my writing career, okay, was when I was writing books 11 and 12 unpublished, okay? I was getting rejection letters. And they were rejection letters for things like Elantris and Dragonsteel, which I was really confident in. Elantris, Dragonsteel, White Sand were the good books during the era of unpublished branding. White Sand, by the way, is out as a graphic novel now. You can also read the prose version by emailing me through my website form. We just send it out for free, so you can compare it to the graphic novel. And by the way, Dragonsteel, you're like, oh, Hoyd's origin story. I will do that eventually. The Shattered Plains started in Dragonsteel, and I pulled them out, and I pulled Dalinar out, and a bunch of stuff when I built Stormlight. And so it's really a schizophrenic book now, and schizophrenic's the wrong term, but half of it was what became Stormlight, and half of it is Hoyd's origin story. So the half that is Hoyd's origin story will eventually get a book. Anyway, darkest point. I'm not selling anything. Everybody is telling me, like, your books are too long. This is the number one thing I'm getting from rejections. Your books are too long. Your books are too long, and your books are not market friendly in that, you know, the worlds are too weird. I'm getting this time and time. And you got to remember, this is, and I love George, but this is right after George got huge. And George introduced gritty, low magic, Earth-like fantasy as kind of the thing that was big. And his books were large too. I don't know why people kept telling me mine were too big, but they wanted gritty, and they wanted low magic, and they wanted Earth-like. And so I was getting rejection after rejection on these things. And what people were buying were things like Joe Abercrombie and stuff, which is great. Joe's a great writer. But, you know, short things that gave people a similar feel to George R. R. Martin, but, you know, were low magic and kind of Earth-like medieval societies, and they wanted shorter versions of George. Is basically what they wanted. And so I actually, you know, would go to cons, and editors would be like, have you read the beginning of Game of Thrones? Write something like that. And so finally, against better advice of everybody, I sat down and said, all right, I'll try something like that. And you guys do not want to read Brandon Sanderson trying to be George R. R. Martin. It was embarrassing. And so I wrote these books, both trying each something different. I like trying to do something different. I'm not sad that I tried something different, but at the end of them, I'm like, I can't do this. These books are crap. The worst books I wrote were were like books 11 and 12. Like, I shouldn't be getting worse as a writer, the more books I write. And so I was in a funk, and I finally just said, you know what? Screw it. I'm going to write the biggest, baddest, most awesome book that I can. They say they're too short. This one's going to be twice as long. They say that the worlds are too weird. I'm going to do the weirdest world that I've always wanted to do. I'm going to write the type of fantasy book that nobody's writing that I wish they would write. And I'm going to break all these rules that they say, oh, don't put flashbacks. Screw you, I'm going to put flashbacks in every book. They say don't do prologues. Screw you, I'm doing 3 prologues. Right? Ray King says... It really does, because Ray King starts with the Heralds, prologue. Then it goes to Zeph, prologue. And then it goes to the viewpoint of the guy in Kaladin's squad, also a prologue, and then it jumps like 8 months, and then we start the story. I did all the stuff they told me not to do because I just wanted to make the biggest, most coolest, baddest epic I could. Bad in a good term. And I finished this book, which was basically me flipping the bird to the entire publishing industry, right? And that, like, within a month of finishing that is when Moshe, who I told you is bipolar, right, got manic and read through his backlist of books that people had sent him, including one I'd sent him 2 years earlier, which was Elantris. He'd never looked at it. He read it in a night. He called me manic and said, I want to buy your book. And actually what happened is he called me, and I'd moved since then and gotten a new phone number. And we used to have landlines back then, I know. I had a cell phone by the time he called me, but before it had my landline number on it. And I'd actually, this is going to date me, my first internet, my first email address was AOL. Right? There's like 3 email, okay. And then I realized AOL, I won't speak ill of, yes I will, AOL sucks. And so I'm like, well, I need to get like my own email address. And so I went and got one, but I meant the email had changed, and I sent to anyone who actively had one of my books on submission. I'm like, this is my new contact info. But he'd had it for 2 years. I figured I was never seeing it. If you were in the last panel, I mentioned that I sent things into Tor and they vanished. And I never got rejections. I never got rejected from Tor. I sent them 4 books. They're just still sitting there somewhere, I'm sure. But so I finished this big beast of a book, right? And then I sell Elantris. I'm like, great, now I don't know what to do. And so my editor's like, oh, what are you working on now? I want to see that too. And I send him Way of Kings. And I can still remember when he called me. And he calls me up and he's like, well, this isn't the sort of thing that new authors usually publish. Can we split it? And I said, no, you split the book, and it's a really bad book because you have all the build-up, but none of the payoff. And he's like, like, that's all right. I've got this idea for Mistborn. I pitched to Mistborn. I said, I'll do Way of Kings later. There were some things I wanted to fix about it. It actually wasn't, it needed something, and I didn't know what that something was yet, and I didn't learn it until working on the Wheel of Time, but that's a different story. But, so you're asking why is Stormlight so different? Well, Stormlight is the series, like, of my heart, right? This is the book that I wrote when nothing else mattered and I thought I might never get published, and I just wanted to do what I felt that the genre needed that nobody was doing, right? And so I felt like fantasy needed to be pushed a little further in its world building, and so I did that. I felt like, you know, there's just a lot going on. The interludes are kind of my solution to the problem Robert Jordan and George R. R. Martin were having, which they're fantastic writers. I was able to learn from them. And Robert Jordan, I think the problems he had was that he fell in love with the side characters. And then these side characters took over the story to an extent that then it was hard to manage. And I'm not like bashing on Robert Jordan. He talked about this. He talked about Book 10 and how being a parallel novel was a mistake. And I can learn from his mistakes. It doesn't make me a better writer. What it means is I can learn from what they did. And I said, okay, I'm going to put pressure valves in my books. I'm going to put a short story collection in each novel where I get to write about side characters, and those who want to skip them can skip them, and those who don't can read them. And I'll just make sure that I contain them in these short stories, these interludes, and that lets me do what I want, but also lets the book kind of keep its focus. So I did a lot of things with these books that were kind of like my love letter to the epic fantasy genre. And so I'm enthusiastic that you actually all like it and are willing to read them. By the way, you have a costume. Have I given you a pen? You get a pen! Yay! Light reader pen. Yeah. I bring little pins based on the Orders of Tonight's Radio. In each book, I have a pen, and if you come to one of my signings in costume, you get a pen. It has to be a different costume than you wore last time. Now I told you this, I'm going to get tons of costumes, but they're really cool little pins. So anyway, go ahead.
Hey, so yeah, I don't really read much, but I listen to all of the audiobooks for all your books, and you're dope, you're super dope, super dope. And one thing I really respect that you do is that very punk rock with how it's like how you approach it. It's like yeah, 3 interludes, yeah, I don't care.
Mm-hmm.
And it actually kind of reminds me a lot of Final Fantasy. Like how when that came on the scene, it was just like, dang, these guys are doing everything the best, the newest, the freshest thing. And I was actually curious if you were, have you ever played Final Fantasy, or were you inspired by it? Or especially because of the swords. Are you just like Final Fantasy?
I will admit, there's a bit of me saying, man, what would it take to make giant swords realistic? Right? Like, I actually, no, this is real. Like, fantasy art, and particularly Japanese fantasy art, has these oversized weapons. I'm like, that's completely unrealistic. But that's a challenge to me. I actually played, I got Final Fantasy cred, right? I played one on the original Nintendo, right? When it was released, and I have actually played them all. 10 is my favorite. And what I, as an aside, what I loved about 10, the voice acting really helps. But I love that, like, 10 is what taught me you don't need to have an angsty, depressed character. Angsty, depressed characters are awesome, but sometimes you can have a hero who's not angsty and depressed, and it works out all right. And so, but yeah, I would call myself deeply influenced by that, certainly.
Thank you.
Hey. Sorry. So with your Cosmere books, I started reading with Mistborn, and I got through the trilogy. Somebody lent me all 3 books, and I went through them. I read really fast, so I was done with them in all 3 of them in like under a week. And so I went looking for some of your other books, and I think I came on The Way of Kings, and I started noticing that there were a little bit of connections, because it's not really apparent that they're connected until you start looking into it. And of course, then I go online and figure out there's this whole Wikipedia.
Then you went down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, then I went down the rabbit hole, and I find out that, oh look, all of these worlds are interconnected, and then there's these little there's these characters that are supposed to be like world hoppers or something, and I could not figure out where the origin of where you learn that these people are actually from the other series.
So where do people learn this? So first, I'm going to give the caveat: if this daunts you, don't worry. It's all cameos right now. You don't have to read the books in a certain order. Well, you should read the series in order, but you don't have to read the series in order. You're not missing out on something. You can read the books, and if you don't see it, it's okay. It's meant to be cameos. 5 minutes? Great. It's supposed to be very subtle. However, where they're getting it is, Hoyd is almost always mentioned by name. That was the first clue to people. Once in a while, he doesn't use his name, but in each series, at least, he's mentioned his name, and people start connecting that name. And then I will usually give little tells, where they found Galadin in The Way of Kings because he spoke in Dula, and so they caught the same words that he used, even though he spoke another language. Some of the words were words he'd used in Elantris. And they're like, oh. And so there's always going to be some little connection there. Watch for people who use the wrong words. For instance, if someone says in the Stormlight Archive, if someone uses the word coin, they're probably using magical means to translate, and they're thinking coin when they mean money or sphere, and they don't use coins on Roshar. And so you'll have people make mistakes like that in world, and they'll talk about things the wrong way, and that will be part of the way that you can connect who doesn't belong there. I intended to be very subtle, however. So I think in A Way of Kings, Hoyd is the only one that uses the word coin and things like that. So if you watch out for stuff like that, but here's the thing about it. At the same time, I learned from Robert Jordan fandom that fans will theorize about everything. And I realized I had to make a decision pretty early on. And this decision, some authors do it one way, some others do it another way. I decided that I had to be okay if the fans guessed what I was doing. Because if I put the foreshadowing in, then it's going to be a mark of respect that people figure it out. And so if you're one of these people and you dig in deeply, you will figure out some of the things that are going on. And then they won't be surprises when the book comes along. And I think that's okay for the fans that are doing that. But I will warn you, I'm not going to change what's happening just because you figure it out. So if you don't want massive spoilers, you shouldn't necessarily hang out too much because they are going to get it right. I would put in the foreshadowing that it is possible to guess what's going to be happening and things like that, because if I don't, then I don't feel like the book is fulfilling, if that makes any sense. So that's just a little warning to you guys. But so far, there are some things they haven't figured out yet that I think they're going to soon, but they haven't quite yet. Yeah. All right. So.
I'd like to give you an extra 10 minutes.
Oh, okay, cool.
If people promise to leave quickly.
Okay, he says we can have an extra 10 minutes if you guys promise to leave quickly. Can we do that? Wow. I have never had a panel do that before. Thank you so much. I'm sure that everyone appreciates it. All right, go ahead.
Hi.
Hi.
My friend, who is in Australia at the moment, where I'm from, he really wants me to answer this question. It's a magic technical question.
Yes, okay.
He seems to believe that it hasn't been answered and everyone's going to go crazy if you say yes.
Okay.
I haven't read the latest Stormlight yet, so
Okay.
I don't know what's going on.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Mm-hmm.
So, he's asking if a Larkin is capable of pushing Stormlight into someone as well as drawing it out.
Ah, that's an excellent question. They actually feed on investiture, like some other people and things that you've seen.
So that would be either a yes or a no?
That's more of a no than a yes, okay?
So what you're saying is that it's unlikely that that's how Zeus was resurrected?
That is correct, yes.
Thanks, that's good to know.
Yep.
Good work.
You did see how Zeth came back foreshadowed earlier in the books, so if you watch for it, the means by which that happens is in there.
How early?
Book one. Book one. Yeah.
Thanks. Thanks.
As an Ashaman warder, I have to ask, would you consider going back to the Wheel of Time and writing a book about the Trolloc Wars?
So, remember that part I talked about, piece of art being done? Sometimes that is painful. In fact, it hurts. That there are certain characters I've said, their story's done. I don't think I should touch this again. We put on top of that, I don't believe Robert Jordan would want me to do more. Now, I have to say that very timidly because it's entirely possible that Harriet or one of her heirs or descendants will decide that there should be more Wheel of Time books. And I'm not going to be one who gets up and be like, no, you shouldn't be doing that, right? That's not my choice. And I want more Wheel of Time like anyone else wants more Wheel of Time. But my personal decision has been that I think Robert Jordan was uncomfortable with the idea of me writing in his world, even though he asked for it to be done. And that if I, particularly with the prominence I have, spent more time in the Wheel of Time, I risk the Wheel of Time becoming more associated with me than it did with Robert Jordan. And I think that would be a very bad thing. And so the answer currently is no, yes, I would consider it. I consider it a lot. And the answer is no. I don't think it would be appropriate for me to do more Wheel of Time for a multitude of reasons.
I appreciate your candor.
Hi. I have another Magic System question.
Okay.
You've mentioned in the last couple of afterwards that you get interesting results when you mix types of investiture.
Yes.
The Twinborn and researches on Roshar. Can you mix a form of magic with a source of investiture? Could Basher, say, use Stormlight in the place of breaths, or would that require tampering via hemalurgy or something like that?
Most of them require tampering. Some of them are a little bit easier than others. And it depends on really what you mean. For instance, white sand can be charged in the presence of any investiture, right? But that's not really using the magic. It's charging it with other investiture. But it would be very easy, for instance, if you can get yourself invested. Like, for instance, it'd be very easy to use breaths to fuel wind running, right? Because the oath and the bond and things like that are going to make it pretty easy. However, fueling allomancy with something else is going to be a lot harder. So it really depends on the magic. It's the sort of thing that there will be lots of science in the books dedicated to making happen in the future, and you will find that some of the processes work easier than other ones do.
That's quite a coincidence that you mentioned you played the original Final Fantasy.
Yes. 4 white mages, it'll never work.
It's been done, it requires a lot of RNG toying. I had a magic system question too. I'm a creative myself, but not really so much an authorial type as like a systems designer type. And that's actually what attracted me to your books first, is that your systems are so, meticulously is not the word, but they're so hard.
Right, hard
and
magic.
I mean, I'm not going to ask you to go over Sanderson's laws, of course, but they add up to create this kind of magical materialism almost, which I think works really well for your storytelling. Do you have any particular method for meshing together the rules that you create for a system and creating a balance that allows you to tell a compelling story with it?
That's an excellent question, because this is a really interesting give and take. Everything needs to be done in service of the story, and the danger of these systems is doing the same sort of thing that an outline does to a story, right? Too rigid an outline means you just don't have a good story in a lot of cases. Too rigid a magic system could actually make certain stories just not work. And I don't think this is the only way you have to do it. For me, this is a lot of the fun, but I have to let myself bend. A good example of this, all right? I wanted to do speed bubbles. If you haven't read the new Mistborn books, we have thanks. We've got like steampunk Mistborn-ish things. You should read them. But one of the powers is these speed bubbles, right? You can slow down or speed up time around you in a bubble, right? So what I do is I say, okay, if we can do this, sciencey people. I go to my sciencey people, that's an official term. I say, all right, what's this going to do? And they're like, yeah, redshift. You're going to irradiate everybody. I'm like, oh, right. Right, irradiating the room. Yeah, and a flashlight becomes a laser beam. Like, stuff like this, what I do, the difference between me and a science fiction writer is I say, I still want speed bubbles. So we will build into the magic system why the redshift doesn't happen. And I will go with that. I will make a rule for it and I'll be consistent, but I can make up a rule. And that is something I would recommend to fantasists versus science fiction writers is this thing, is remember, the story is king. Be consistent once you've done something, but go ahead and give yourself the wiggle room to build something that's going to make for great storytelling. That balance between being consistent and telling a great story, I think, is where you want to be.
Thank you.
Yep. All right. Looks like maybe one more.
Okay, so I have a question about progression of power for the Knights Radiant. So we see with Kaladin that it seems like there's a definitive order to the ideals and how you gain them, I guess. It would be hard to touch on the third without having
without spoilers, yeah.
Would that be... Is that the same for all of the orders? Like the Will Shapers, for example, are much more varied and individualistic. Could they go through a different order, and if so, would that affect how they express their certain ideas?
Yes, the oaths are very individualized. In fact, you'll get a lot more of this as you see different people, even within the same order, swearing oaths, and you'll see how it works. Even within a given order, there is individuality to them. I'm going to give you a Rappo. You can have a card. Let's see. There's a Rappo card. It means read and find out. That just means I'm not going to answer this because I'll answer it in the books, and you will start to figure these things out as the books go. I'm going to throw it out to you. That did not fly. That did not fly. Okay. So I will see if they have an extra room. They probably don't. It's DragonCon. Everything's booked. Everything's packed. If they do happen to have a larger room, I'll try to get to a larger room for the reading. So check beforehand. Otherwise, I will be doing a signing tomorrow. One for the just the autograph place, the International House South of the Marriott, 1 to 2 p.m., and then I'll be at Kevin J. Anderson's booth at 4 to 5 p.m. But I don't have any signings today because I was just booked straight through on panels. So if you're gonna be gone, try and find me at the beginning of one of my panels or something like that to get a book signed. Otherwise, thank you guys very much for coming. I don't know if that worked or not.
Yeah. I really hope it gets optioned for movies. As I was listening to it, all I could hear was Buddy Cop music, and it just left off the page.
Man, if I could...
It's so good stuff.
Yeah, it was still broadcasting.
I was worried about it. And I hope, fingers crossed, good luck, because it's